Welcome to Successfully Ambiguous. I'm Christine Brooks-Cappadocia.
Welcome to Successfully Ambiguous. The mark of an entrepreneur or an innovator is someone who can say yes and figure things out as they go along. Someone with that creative energy and can-do spirit. Today, we're going to meet somebody who embodies that throughout his entire career and, quite frankly, with every interaction I've ever had with him. David Kwok is the Director of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at York University's YSpace Innovation Hub and the host of the new At the Root podcast. So let's open the door and meet David. David, I know you've recently launched a podcast, At the Root, and I loved hearing your story about, your origin story about not necessarily taking the route expected of you and not necessarily meeting what you thought you would be your mom's expectations. Tell me a little bit about that. That's something a lot of our listeners deal with is, those pivots that end up at somewhere you didn't think you'd be.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, I think big part of it is, to be frank, as a 19, 20-year-old, like most of the time you don't know what you're going to do. And even deciding when you're going to university. With my origin story, it was really, for a long time, I think a lot of us wants, you want to make your parents happy, and that was a big part of it. But there's just something there that didn't make sense. And I think, I was fortunate enough where I came to that realization fairly soon and was able to pivot kind of my career and where I wanted to go in terms of my trajectory. But it took a lot, and it took a lot of people kind of pushing me in the right way. I think it ultimately really came down to, like, could I see myself doing it? Like, what could I see myself doing? And I was fortunate enough where I had some friends and some parents and teachers that was like, hey, I don't really know if that's gonna fit your personality, right? Like, me being a researcher or me being behind a lab is just, it was back then I was like, yeah, I can kind of see it, maybe let's try it. But the more and more it got closer and got more real was when I was like, yeah, no, I really can't do this. I like, having conversations, talking to people. And that's when I think the realization came. And I was fortunate enough where, like I said, my mom was crying when I told her I didn't want to go become a doctor. But at the end of the day, she came to a realization of it. And I think it took a little bit of selfishness to kind of decide that it was something for myself more than anything else. And it works out. But if you ask a 20-year-old me if I knew it was going to work out, absolutely not. But it worked out in the end. And I think it just took a little bit of kind of selfishness and courage to kind of say, you know what, I'm going to do this for myself, and it'll work out. But I just got to put my thought to it.
Well, and ironically enough, you've probably helped bring more research innovations to market than 20-year-old David could have ever achieved in if he'd gone through that traditional path. You run the YSpace network at York University, where you work with founders. One of the things that I was really impressed with the way YSpace operates is the way that you build communities within the founders' communities. Why is that important?
I think having a community first approach is just ingrained in kind of what we do. And I think a lot of it is that a lot of our teams comes from being either former founders or being in the community, where we've seen the power of the community and what it can mean. Actually, more recently, what we've started telling people is the Y in Y space doesn't stand for York, it stands for your space, your community. And I think that's been important for us because we wanted from day one to create a safe space for founders to feel like they can come and get support that they need, but then also feel comfortable and safe enough that they can share their stories, both wins and losses. Because I think there's too much in our community of just all the good. And I get it. Everyone wants to celebrate the good. Everyone wants to talk about how amazing things are. But that leaves a lot of gap for folks who are maybe not going through the same success, that are starting to question themselves, and where imposter syndrome becomes bigger and bigger because they're only seeing successes. So for us, creating a community where we could be vulnerable, we could be honest with our feedback and conversations was really important, because now you're starting to unravel the layers of entrepreneurship and what it actually means for folks and being a founder, so that they can have some of those tough conversations, and you never know the support you're going to get. And I think that was the beauty of the community.
What's the best piece of advice that you can give somebody early on in their journey?
I think two. One, just do it. I think the part of the scariest thing is just doing it, and you kind of just got to get up there and do it, as scary as it is, or as simple as it sounds, as well as just you have so many thoughts in your head on why it's not going to work or why it couldn't work. At some point, you just got to turn it off and say, I'm going to try it and see what happens. So I think that's number one. And then two is just building the right supports. We don't want to be naive and say we're going to do it and it's going to be perfect. You need a support system who's going to coach you, pick you up on the bad days. We always joke, entrepreneurship is like a roller coaster. Some days are high, some days are low. The lows are real low and the highs are real high. You need someone to pick you up on the low days and you need someone to ground you on the high days. So having that support system that can kind of do that for you is really important. So that'd be my advice to anyone. Like get it going, get it started. Don't be, and we say, there's this founder syndrome where nothing's ever perfect in your eyes, but you always think you can only put it out when it's perfect. The reality of it is the market has no idea what's perfect. They just know what you put out. So you might as well get it out, get feedback, and then, as you change, say it's version 2, version 3, like that's what people do, and then make sure you have that support system.
What have some of the conversations you've been having on your podcast, have you learned anything that you wouldn't have learned from your work in the university or the startup world?
It's been really interesting because for our podcast, it was really about giving Asian leaders voices and goes back to kind of some of the stuff I was saying earlier, which was we don't have a lot of Canadian success stories, or we do and we don't tell them. One of the upcoming episodes that we have, we got to interview two restaurateurs, owners of a restaurant, kind of an Asian restaurant that's been in the city for a while. And they took us basically walked us through what the back of the kitchen looked like. How is it set up? How does it operate? The mentalities of the workers that are there.
So thinking back in your career, was there a moment when you felt ambiguous or perhaps uncertain that at a time that ultimately ended up being a major point for you? And what advice would you have given yourself at that time?
I think the biggest shift for me has always been looking at my career in a way where not knowing, but understanding that the job you have now wasn't always there. And I'll explain it in a way where I think most of the time in school, at least when I was in school, it was always like, the pathway was do well in school, get a job, and that was it. But just the journey that I was on, it was always like the job that I was going for never existed. So I was always on the path of creating my own job, but what I always knew was the skill set I had and what that looked like. So I think my advice to people is you might not know the job, the function, and all those different things, but you know what you want to do. And I think take that and own it and just be open to what the opportunities could look like. And I give a quick example of myself, which is when I came to York, it was, hey, help us build this incubator accelerator. Never did I thought I'd be here for 8 years and become the role I am, but the role that I have now didn't exist 8 years ago. It was as I was building and progressing, it was created and things were made, and all the roles on our teams were made to satisfy what we were making. So we see that in industry, we see that in startups. Like most of the jobs doesn't exist, and especially with the changing landscape of what we have now, where you have all these AI tools, you have all these different access points. It's going to change, but I think honing on a skill set that you're really good at it and figuring that piece out and then just knowing it can take different shapes. I think that's been helpful for me as a career thing to know that I know what I'm good at, I know what I can do, and I know what I can't be replaced in doing. Whatever way, shape that takes me in my career, I'm gonna go for it. And then the other piece is this can be a good and bad. My team thinks it's more of a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. Just not knowing how to say no. It's like, yeah, we can figure it out. We can always figure it out. Opportunities come and people say opportunities come when you're ready and ready for it. I also find some opportunities you might not be ready, but you get ready and you figure it out. So just kind of having that mentality to know that you will always figure it out is pretty important there.
I think that is the mark of an innovator, being able to say yes and then go figure it out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, David. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And if listeners or viewers out there are thinking about building new skills, there's never a bad time to go back and get a certificate and add to your degree. And if you're thinking about that, come and join one of the school's continuing studies free webinars.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Successfully Ambiguous. Be sure and subscribe to us on YouTube and listen to us on Apple and Spotify. If you've got career questions, be sure to email me at successfullyambiguous@yorku.ca. Don't forget, when opportunity knocks, be ready to answer.